Hi, welcome to High Road. My name's Andrew, and in this video I'm going to see if it's possible to sand off the finish on a cheap guitar like this without ruining the thin layer of laminate wood underneath. So we've all seen them, these cheap beginner guitars that all cost about $100 or less, and they've got this awful looking kind of reflective finish on them. It looks like it was just sprayed on in a hurry and shipped out of a Chinese factory and ended up in some poor beginner's hands. Now, nothing wrong with the guitars necessarily, but I just hate the way they look. They look cheap. So I want to find out if it's possible to sand off this finish and replace it with something that looks a little bit more expensive, like an oil finish. But the thing is that all these cheap guitars are made of laminate wood, which is essentially a type of plywood, and the outer layer is particularly thin, like it's maybe less than 1 millimeter in thickness. So the risk is that if you sand a little bit too far, you may end up sanding through that top layer of laminate wood and into the layer of wood beneath it, and you'll end up with this awful looking hole, like a patch in the guitar that doesn't look the same as the rest of the wood around it. So that's what I'm going to try and find out. This is just a junk guitar. I don't care what happens to it. I'm using it to just experiment and find out an answer to this question, because I can't find a video anywhere on YouTube that tells me if it's possible to do this. So I'm making my own. Alright, just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about here, I've focused the camera on the inner edge of the sound hole, and you can see here what I mean about the different layers of laminate wood. The outside layer is that top one there. That's supposed to be the nice looking wood, the veneer. That's less than 1 millimeter thick. The inside layer is a lot thicker. That's kind of probably just any old ugly looking wood that's just there for structural support. And then there's an inner layer as well, so it's got 3 layers of laminate. So that top layer being less than 1 millimeter, I've got to be really careful not to sand through that, because then it'll expose the uglier looking middle layer, which is not designed to be seen at all. So I'll flip the guitar over because I'm going to do my experimenting on the back of the guitar first, and I'm going to start with some tried and true 120 grit sandpaper. I'm just going to wrap that on the back of a sponge block. That, and I guess I'll just pick an area, maybe this area here, and make a start. Okay, well, as you can see, this actually looks kind of good. This is some really nice, pure looking wood underneath. And I really think that if all of the rest of the finish was sanded off, this guitar could look quite beautiful if it was refinished with just a clear oil coat. However, the real reason I've done this is to find out if it's possible to sand away the finish but not the top layer of laminate. However, I'm starting to get a bit worried about this little area here. I don't know if you can see that the color is a little bit different along there. I'm going to zoom in. Hopefully you can see this, but this is the outside layer of the laminate, and this area along here just has a slight discoloration to it. Now, I don't know if that's because I haven't sanded away all of the finish and that's some remnants of the finish, or if I've sanded too far and that's actually the next layer of wood underneath starting to come through. The only way for me to find out for sure is to keep sanding. So if I keep sanding this area and it turns out to look more like this, then I know that this is just a little bit of finish left over. But if it gets more and more different, I know that I'm sanding through into the plywood below. Here goes nothing. Alright, looks like I got lucky. Looks like there was just a little bit of finish left over, and that's nice and clean now. So this is good. This is making me feel hopeful that it is possible to sand a finish off a cheap guitar without ruining it. However, this begs the question then, how far do you have to sand to ruin the guitar? I kind of want to know, because I want to know how close I am. I want to know, like, if I'm right on the edge, or if I've actually got, like, you know, another 0.5 millimeter or so before I ruin it. That's what this guitar's for, so I'm going to find out. Wow, my arm's getting tired and I still haven't gotten through the first outer layer of laminate. This is starting to make me think that I don't need to be so worried about taking the finish off. Okay, so what we're looking at around the edges here is this brown red area is the original finish. This kind of blonde area around the edges, that's the pure wood underneath once the finish has been sanded off. And you can see with this layer that all the grain goes in that direction. You can see the grain lines. This little patch in the center, that's where I've sanded through, and you can see that the grain goes in the opposite direction like that. Now I underestimated how long it would take to sand through to that layer. I really thought that the top layer of laminate was not going to be much thicker than the finish and that I'd be through to that in about a minute. But in reality, that took me about 25 minutes, maybe half an hour of just constant sanding to penetrate through to that layer. So that tells me that you don't have to be too worried about sanding off the finish and taking off too much of the wood, because yeah, it really took a long time for me to get through to that next layer. Now, of course, the thickness of this first layer of laminate could be different on every different guitar, so I can't say that every guitar is going to be the same as this one, but you know, you'd have to think that you don't have to worry too much about sanding off the finish and taking off too much wood. It seems like you can take off the finish and, you know, be pretty safe. So I'm going to try the front of the guitar now and just see what results I get. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing on the front here. And by the way, these cheap guitars, the rosette around the sound hole here is usually just a sticker that peels off. It's not even a real rosette. See how it's just peeling off with my thumb there? So that'll come off. I'm going to try and sand this little area here and just see what it looks like. Well, yeah, this took all of about 5 minutes to get this far with removing the front finish, and it seems to be the same kind of thing. It's really nice looking wood underneath, and I really think that a guitar like this would look so much nicer if it was just stripped back there and given a nice plain natural finish. And it looks like, yeah, you can do that. Well, I'm really pleased with how this little experiment turned out. I found out exactly what I've always wanted to know, which is, can you sand the finish off one of these cheap laminate guitars without ruining the wood underneath? And it turns out that, yeah, you can. It's pretty easy, actually. It only took me 5 minutes to sand through the finish, and that exposed a really nice layer of raw wood underneath, which is probably ready for an oil stain or something, anything you like, really, but it's just, you know, it's really nice wood underneath. And on the back here, you can see, if I put it in the right light, there you go. So this is the first layer of laminate, and it took me half an hour to sand through it to actually expose the next layer. So if this finish took 5 minutes to sand through and the laminate took half an hour, I don't see how you could accidentally ruin the guitar by sanding too far, unless you're using a power sander or something. And just to clarify, I did this by hand sanding with 120 grit sandpaper. So I'm not going to finish sanding this guitar or anything. It's just a junk guitar and it served its purpose now. But armed with the information that this has given me, I'm probably going to do a project sometime in the future where I take a cheap laminate beginner guitar like this one and I strip it back and I refinish it and try and make it look like an expensive guitar. And I think that'll be a fun project. Hopefully you found this video helpful, especially if you're someone like me who's thinking about refinishing a cheap laminate guitar. Hopefully now you won't feel too scared to attack it with some sandpaper and just go for it. As always, if you want to learn how to make music, record music, and build musical stuff, start now by subscribing below, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.